A Tale of the 1849 Gold Rush. The Sierra Nevada mountains were not made of rock and pine. To Elias Thorne, they were made of promises and lies. Elias stood knee-deep in the freezing waters of the American River, his fingers blue and numbed beyond feeling. In his calloused hands, he held a rusted tin pan, swirling the silty water in a rhythmic, desperate circle. He was 24 years old, but in the harsh glare of the California sun, his reflection in the water looked like that of a man of 50. He had left a quiet farm in Ohio and a girl named Martha who had promised to wait. He had sold everything, the plow, the mules, the family silver, to buy a passage west. Like tens of thousands of others, the 49ers, he had been infected by the fever. The newspapers back east called it a golden paradise. Here, in the dirt of Sutter's Mill, it felt more like a golden purgatory. The illusion of wealth. Anything, Elias? The voice came from Caleb, a former sailor from New Bedford who had deserted his ship in San Francisco Harbor the moment he heard the word gold. Caleb was coughing, a dry, hacking sound that had become the soundtrack of their camp. Elias tilted the pan. At the bottom, amidst the black sand, lay 3 tiny specks of yellow. They were no larger than the head of a pin. Enough to buy a loaf of bread, Elias muttered. Maybe a tin of salted beef if the merchant is feeling merciful. That was the cruel irony of the gold rush. A man could find $5 worth of gold in a day, but a single egg cost $1, and a pair of boots, necessary to keep your feet from rotting in the river, cost $50. The only people getting rich were the shopkeepers and the laundrymen. The descent into despair. As the weeks turned into months, the easy gold near the surface vanished. The riverbanks became crowded, a chaotic sprawl of canvas tents, mud holes, and desperate men from every corner of the globe. There were Chinese immigrants in silk caps, Sonoran miners from Mexico, and Europeans who had crossed oceans, all huddled over the same muddy water. Violence began to simmer like the midday heat. One evening, a man 2 tents down was stabbed over a disputed claim, a 6-foot patch of dirt that likely held nothing but gravel. "We need to go higher," Caleb whispered one night by the dying embers of their fire. "The mother lode is up there, in the quartz veins. This river wash is for scavengers. I heard a man found a nugget the size of a goose egg near Angel's Camp." Elias looked at his hands. The skin was cracked and bleeding from the constant immersion in alkaline water. "Caleb, you can barely walk. That cough is getting worse." "Gold heals all wounds, Elias. One big strike and we go home like kings." The High Sierra. They abandoned their claim and pushed higher into the mountains. The terrain was brutal. Pack mules slipped off narrow ridges and the air grew thin and cold. They reached a secluded ravine where the earth looked promising, a dark, heavy clay tucked beneath a granite overhang. For 3 days, they dug until their backs felt like they were being sheared by hot irons. On the 4th day, Elias's pickaxe hit something with a dull thud that didn't sound like stone. He dropped to his knees, clawing at the earth with his fingernails. There, embedded in a vein of white quartz, was a jagged lump of dull, buttery yellow. He pried it loose. It was heavy, so heavy it made his heart hammer against his ribs. "Caleb, look!" Caleb crawled over, his face pale and waxy. He touched the gold with a trembling finger. It's the one. That's $1,000 if it's an ounce, maybe more." For a moment, the exhaustion vanished. He saw the farm in Ohio. He saw Martha in a silk dress. He saw a life where he never had to touch a shovel again. They spent the next few hours frantically digging, finding 2 more smaller nuggets. They were rich. The price of gold. That night, the sky turned a terrifying shade of iron gray. A Sierra storm, swift and merciless, descended upon the ravine. The temperature plummeted. Caleb's fever spiked. He lay in the corner of their makeshift lean-to, shivering violently despite being wrapped in every blanket they owned. "Elias," Caleb rasped, "keep the gold. Just get me some whiskey. My chest feels like it's full of broken glass." Elias looked at the 3 nuggets sitting on a flat stone. They were beautiful, but they couldn't produce heat. They couldn't be eaten. He tried to start a fire, but the water was soaked, and the wind screamed through the canyon, dousing every spark. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving a deceptive blanket of white snow over the jagged rocks. Elias turned to wake Caleb, but he already knew. Caleb was cold, colder than the gold nuggets resting just inches from his hand. The long walk home. Elias buried Caleb under a pile of heavy stones to keep the coyotes away. He didn't have the strength to dig a proper grave in the frozen earth. He took the gold, sewed it into the lining of his coat, and began the long trek back down the mountain. When he finally reached Sacramento, he walked into a bank to weigh his fortune. $2,400, the clerk said, unimpressed. He had seen a dozen men like Elias that day, hollow-eyed, smelling of death, clutching bits of metal. Elias walked out into the street. $2,000 was a fortune in Ohio, but as he looked around at the gambling dens and the muddy streets filled with broken men, the weight of the gold felt like lead. He had lost his friend, his health, and a year of his life. He sat on a crate and pulled out a crumpled letter from Martha. It was 6 months old. She spoke of the harvest and the peace of the valley. He realized then that the gold rush wasn't a search for wealth. It was a test of what a man was willing to trade for his soul. He bought a ticket on a stagecoach heading east the next morning. Elias Thorne returned to Ohio a wealthy man by local standards. He bought the farm next to his father's and married Martha. But for the rest of his life, he could never stand the sound of a rushing river, and he never ever wore anything the color of yellow. He knew the truth that the newspapers never printed. You can find gold in the dirt, but you can't find life there.